So my assignment, Abuna had given me 1 Samuel chapter 26, but I noticed that 24 and 26 are similar, so I want us to recognize those patterns. So can we read 24 and 26? But I'm going to ask a good reader to read 24 and another good reader to read 26. 1 Samuel 24 and 26. Is that okay, Abuna?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Is someone going to volunteer to read 24? Thank you, George.
Now it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines that it was told him, saying, "Take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of wild goats. So he came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave. And Saul went in to attend to his needs. David and his men were staying in the recess of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise against Saul, and Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, went out of the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind them, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Indeed, David seeks your harm? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eye spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you. Yet you help my life to take it. Let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients say, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Who do you pursue? A dead dog, a flea? Therefore let the Lord be judge and judge between you and me, and see and plead my case, and deliver me out of your hand." So it was when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, that Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. Then he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me with good, whereas I have rewarded you with evil. And you have shown this day how you have dealt well with me, for when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him get away safely? Therefore may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now I know indeed that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Therefore swear now to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house." So David swore to Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold.
Thank you. I want to give you just a little bit of an introduction before we go on to the next chapter. Keep in mind something. The Israelites in the Old Testament were accustomed to be under the direction of judges for about 400 years. And during that time, they were kind of turbulent years. A lot of oppression, a lot of disorder, a lot of apostasy, people leaving the faith. It wasn't an organized militia, I guess I would say. And the Israelites noticed that the other territories all had kings. All the other villages or whatever, they had rulers, supreme rulers. They didn't. And so they began grumbling and complaining that they need a king. Now, mind you, God had already foreordained a king for them. And who was that king? It's King David. But God was waiting on him to mature. But no, They wanted a king right now. And this is 1 Samuel. Just as they grumbled and complained, right, when they were in the wilderness. Even though God revealed himself to them, was taking care of them, gave them provisions, they were still complaining. And so it doesn't surprise us that they're complaining now and saying we want a king. So, and God in his mercy, because sometimes we think the God of the Old Testament was so oppressive and so harsh. But here he said to Samuel, anoint them a king. Go ahead. Out of their weakness, go ahead and give them a king. So the king that they chose was Saul. So I want you to keep this in mind. This is not the king that God had chosen for the Israelites. Saul was maybe kind of a big man in stature, and probably he had good looks. So he's probably popular with the people. And of course, God doesn't look at someone's outward countenance. He looks where? Inside. And that's why when they were looking for someone to defeat Goliath, and I think you studied this last week, and they were looking over Jesse's sons, they went down the list from the older one, all through 7 of them, and none of them were accepted, even though maybe some of them were pretty strong men and they had leadership skills. And then they said, well, we have one left, and he's a shepherd, a little boy out there shepherding the sheep. And they said, that's the one that we want. And that was David. So that's the one that God chose. So God is not looking at outward strength. He's looking inward. So Saul was chosen as king. And as you know, Saul disobeyed God. Saul was kind of rebellious. Saul even, at one point, consulted a medium, like a soothsayer, which kind of goes against God's teachings. So I just wanted to give you that history, so you know, and then we're going to compare. Because God always intended for the Israelites to be under the rule of, let's say, a theocracy. What does theocracy mean? It means a people that are governed by God, theo. Not democracy, not a republic, not whatever, a theocracy or a theocratic monarchy. But the Israelites were kind of in a rush to be like everybody else around them, which, we can kind of relate to that, to be honest with you, because sometimes we think about what's going on in society around us and we want to fit in, or we want to have what they have. And sometimes we pray for things that are detrimental to us. Anyway, okay, having known that, can we flip to chapter 26 and try to see what pattern, what's the similarity between 24 and 26? Why did we choose 24 and 26? There must be something similar about it. Who's going to be the good reader? Sorry I didn't give you the microphone, George. You should have reminded me, I'm sorry. Anyone wants to read? I'll give you the microphone, I promise. I know you have to read, all right.
Now the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is David not hiding in the hill of Hachilah, opposite of Jeshimon? Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped in the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon, by the road. But David stayed in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies, and understood that Saul had indeed come. So David arose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Now Saul lay within the camp, with the people encamped all around him. Then David answered and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai came to the people by night. And there Saul lay sleeping within the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. And Abner and all the people lay all around him. And Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore please let me strike him at once with the spear right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said, furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or this day shall come to die, or he shall go out to battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed, but please take now the spear and the jug of water that are by his head, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jug of water by Saul's head, and they got away, and no man saw or knew it or awoke, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. Now David went over to the other side and stood on the top of a hill afar off, a great distance between them. And David called out to the people and said to Abner, son of Ner, saying, do not answer Abner. Then Abner answered and said, who are you calling out to the king? So David said to Abner, are you not a man and who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy your lord the king. The thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not guarded your master, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is and the jug of water that was by his head. Then Saul knew David's voice and said, is that your voice, my son David? David said, it is my voice, O Lord, O king. And he said, why does my Lord thus pursue his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in my hand? Now therefore please let my Lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is the children of men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. So now do not let my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return my son David, for I will harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. And David answered and said, here is the king's spear. Let one of the young men come over and get it. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. And indeed, as your life was valued much this day in my eyes, so let my life be valued much in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, may you be blessed, my son David. You shall both do great things and also still prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place.
Can anyone tell me, and this is not one of the questions that we're going to discuss, can anyone tell me why David is a type of Christ? Maybe many reasons really, but one of the reasons that played out for me is that, did you hear what David said? You sought after my life, but I didn't do anything to you. How does that relate to Jesus Christ? Same, right? They sought after him to put him to death. Did he do any harm to anyone? No. So David is a type of Christ in that way. There's so many lessons that we can glean from these chapters. You know why Saul wanted to go after David, right? He was jealous. Remember, David, as a young man, was kind of chosen to go up against Goliath. And he conquered him, as you studied last week. And so, of course, Saul was thinking to himself, this young man is going to take over my throne. And so he was threatened by him. Even though David was of the deepest respect for Saul, as you saw in today's scripture reading. He had so much honor for Saul. That's a reason why he didn't take his life. A number of things that strike me, and maybe more will strike you. I want you to notice David's persistence in gaining the favor of God. David's persistence, not in doing evil, but in gaining the favor of God. which meant having to restrain himself, having to refrain from the opportunity to kill Saul and taking over the throne. It happened once, it happened twice, it happened 3 times, it might have happened even more, I don't recall, but at least 3 times David had the opportunity to take over the throne. But showing his self-control and honor and respect to the anointed king, he did just that. But his persistence is just really unusual, and I like to point out that to you because I want you to be persistent in what is good. You remember the parable of the persistent widow? It's a story that Christ told about the widow who was talking to the unjust judge for her justice, and he kept turning her down, but she didn't walk away. What did she do? She continued to nag him, if I can use that expression. And because of her persistence in prayer, he granted her the request. There's someone else that I know that was really pretty persistent, a man by the name of Job. Remember him? After he was struck and lost everything, he lost his family, he lost his livestock, he lost possessions, and his wife was telling him, curse your God. But out of his persistence and patience for God, he continued to be a faithful follower. Speaking of persistence still, do you remember the man who was lying down next to the pool at Bethsaida or Bethesda? Bethsaida maybe? For how many years? 38 years. Lying down next to the pool, waiting for the angel of the Lord to stir the water once a year, hoping that someone will push him in so that he'd be the first one and then he'd be healed. Would you do that for 38 years, or would you give up after the first, second, and third year? That's persistence. And that's what David showed in refraining from taking Saul's life. That's one thing. Secondly, look at the honor that he showed to God's anointed. Because Saul was anointed as king and had a prestigious position, David didn't lay his hand on him. I wonder how many of us have the same relationship with honored people. Like, what do I mean by that? Like with authority. Like Saul had authority. How many of us honor the church as an authoritarian entity? So that when the church says, this is good, and this is valid, and this is not, do we submit ourselves under the feet of the church, if I can use that expression? Or when the Holy Synod comes together and has a decision that's made and it's brought to us through the clergymen, are you one to grumble and complain and say, I don't like this decision and I'm going to contest it? Or do you become a disciple of the church and say, the Holy Spirit speaks through the authority of the church? Or when your metropolitan or the bishop of your diocese gives an order for all the churches of his territory to do something in particular, do you rebel or do you submit yourself to the authority? Or when your father of confession gives you guidance because he knows your history, your spiritual history, based on your confessions, and he says to you, make amends with so-and-so, or give back what you stole. Do you submit yourself to the authority of the church? That's what David did. He submitted himself to authority of the anointed one, the one in leadership. I want you also to notice the heart of King David. Because what was said about David and his heart? That he had the heart of God. He had the heart of God, which is kind of different from what Saul had. But David had the heart of God. And how would you describe the heart of God? If you were to give some adjectives or anything that comes to mind about the heart of God, what would you say? I'll say it for you. Humility, forgiveness, love, compassion, and mercy. How about all that? Yes? No? Yes, of course. And he showed that in the 2 chapters that we just read. He showed his humility by subjecting himself to the king. He showed forgiveness because Saul wanted his life, but David didn't retaliate. He showed mercy on the king because he spared him his life. He showed compassion for him, probably because of his disposition. Maybe David understood why Saul wanted to take his life. Not that it was right, but maybe he understood and had compassion for him. In terms of the way Saul operated towards King David, what do you think? The reason we chose these 2 chapters was because you would think after the first one that we read, 24, that Saul might have learned his lesson or was being sincere about what he said. He apologized, didn't he? And then what happens in 26? It happens again. It happened again. So I'll leave that up for the discussion. I won't go too much into that. But I want you to think to yourselves, when you fell into the sin of envy and what it led you to do. And this could be because some of your peers at school, let's say, are academically successful and you were struggling. It could be your colleagues at work were given some kind of an accolade or promotion, even though you were longer there at the company. They're a newcomer, or they weren't there as long as you have. Or maybe some social situations that cause you to be jealous, that maybe you were close to someone, one of your friends, and you feel like maybe they are being taken away by another group. And so you feel a little jealous. Or can I mention this, and maybe you guys won't relate to it, but there's a level of jealousy, I don't know if you'd call it jealousy, but among those that immigrate to the U.S. And they ask for resources or assistance or jobs or anything to get them on their feet. And those who are established here sometimes get an attitude and they say to themselves, I had to claw and scratch when I came overseas 20 years ago, and they should have to do the same. We shouldn't have to give them on a silver platter something that wasn't given to me from the beginning. I had to earn it. So why should I give them whatever? I don't know if that's jealousy or if it's something else, because sometimes there's comparisons between families of a parish or a Coptic community as a whole, and people just don't want others to be successful like they are or to come up to their level, whether it's social status or otherwise. Could be a dumb example. It could be something you relate to. I don't know.